Today I want to discuss the Noahide Commandments and how they're the means of the Creator in judging the actions of men, communities, cities, and nations. We're going to look into the Hebrew Scriptures to see how He has used them in the past and see how very important it is for us today in our generation to learn these commandments and begin to observe them and keep them in accordance of the way He wants us to do that. And we will see that they are His very will for mankind. Now, I know that there are many opponents out there that oppose the Noahide Commandments. But in my opinion, personally, that 99% of those opposers have not really done their due diligence in studying and researching the whole matter out. They've not sat with learned teachers of the Hebrew Scriptures and have learned Hebrew and learned how to study the Hebrew Scriptures. The Hebrew Scriptures is a language like itself, and one needs to be taught how to actually study the Hebrew Scriptures. Just like learning a language, you can pick up some stuff on your own, and you might be okay, but if you go into that country being self-taught, trying to speak that language without having been taught by an adequate teacher of that language, you'll pretty much find out how deficient you are in the language and could make a fool of yourself. And the same thing is with the Torah, with the Hebrew Scriptures. It is a language in and of itself. The Torah is a divine language which was given to a specific people to be caretakers. And when we sidestep the caretakers thinking that we can read it for ourselves in our own translated language and get the meaning of the verses of the Torah, we will find out real quick how deficient we are and how foolish we are when we travel into the land of the people who speak the language of the Torah, who was raised with it, have studied it all their lives, who have lineages that goes back 3,300 years of studying that language that was passed down from the Creator on Mount Sinai on the day of Shavuot. So we're going to look into the Hebrew Scriptures here, and we're going to see that the Creator gave us 3 examples to look at, to study, and to learn from. The first one that I want to discuss with you is the flood. Now, before we get to the flood, we need to understand that when the Creator was communicating with Adam, his first creation, He gave him 6 of the commandments. There's 7 total, but He gave him 6 commandments to live by and to pass on to his children, so that when the earth would be inhabited, it would be inhabited with harmony, with peace, a rule of divine law, to where man and God would walk together in peace and in harmony, and the creation would grow. But as we know through history, that Adam failed the first time, the first commandment that he was given. And then he was sent out of that special place to inhabit the earth. And he taught his children the 6 commandments. And we know this, and we'll understand this much later. But a portion of his children began to rebel against the 6 commandments, deciding to choose upon themselves how they wanted to live. And then over a period of time, the majority of the earth became corrupted either because the six commandments had been forgotten after generations of neglect, or just out and out rebellion against the Creator. Now, when we come to the flood, we know that God spoke to Noah. Noah was considered righteous in his generation, meaning that he was an observer of these six commandments to the best of his ability at the time, because he was righteous in his generation, and his generation was not very good. We know that the Creator had told Noah that the earth was corrupt and it was full of robbery and violence. Now, here's the thing. If there were no commandments, if God had not orally spoken six precepts, six categorical commandments to Adam to pass down that made it all the way to Noah, then God would have no means, or the Creator would have no means of judging the earth. Now, the Creator does not judge arbitrarily. When the book of Genesis opens up, we find that the name of the Creator that is used there is Elohim. Well, that Hebrew word also means judge. In the Hebrew Scriptures, we also find that angels and even men are called Elohim. They're called judges. Now, a judge, he is one who is a ruler over law. And so therefore we know that the Creator created the creation using laws. We have natural laws that man has figured out on their own. The laws of physics, certain laws of nature, the laws of gravity. There's laws of science. There's laws of health. There are many laws, natural laws, that man has discovered throughout the centuries, denoting and showing us that the Creator formed the creation around a rule of law, whether it be physical or even spiritual or communal. Now, being He doesn't judge arbitrarily, these six commandments was enforced. They were never nullified. He never sent a prophet to nullify the six commandments after man left the garden. So, now we understand that God says that the earth was corrupt and full of robbery and violence. Now, the word corrupt, when it mentions corrupt in the Hebrew Scriptures, it generally is referring to the idolatry, the worshiping of idols, be it the stars, anything within the creation, the stars, or anything that's on the earth, or even angels, anything that's created in the spirit realm, anything that is worshipped or served other than the Creator Himself. Corrupt also refers to the violation of morality laws, like the law of the prohibition of forbidden sexual relations. The earth had become so corrupt that even the animals at the time before the flood had been corrupt in their morality. The animals had a morality that they had become corrupt in. And that's one reason why, along with man, the animals had to be, the land animals and the birds had to be wiped out. Now, we also understand that the earth was full of robbery and violence. The Hebrew word is Hamas. These were the primary areas of violations that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back with the Creator. The earth had become so full of theft and injustice and violence from against man to man, that the primary sins of the people before the flood was the sins against one another. So thus, the Creator instructed Noah to build an ark and bring certain animals onto the ark. And we know the story of Noah and Noah's ark. But the primary lesson of Noah's ark is the fact that there was a rule of law in which God judged mankind by. If it was not in existence, then he would have no right to judge man, because man would have no knowledge of right and wrong and what God expected. So the proof that he said that it was full of robbery, full of violence, and it was corrupt, shows us that he had instructed man how to live, and man as a whole at that time, except for one man, had violated everything to a point to where it was time to wipe man off the face of the earth. And it was primarily due to the robbery and the violence from man to man. That's proof one that the 7 Noahide Commandments have been in existence since day one of the creation of man. The second one I want to look at is Sodom and Gomorrah. This is in the time of Abraham. Now, we know that Abraham fled his house, and his father was a craftsman of idols, and he rejected the idols of his father, and he came and clinged to the Creator, the one true God of creation, the unseen God who man has not seen any form of at all. We know that in Genesis, or we read in Genesis chapter 18, that God loved Abraham because he commanded his children to do tzedakah and mishpat, which is translated as charity and justice, or it also is translated as righteous or righteousness and justice. He commanded his children, and it says in justice, in tzedakah, and in mishpat. In Genesis 18, we are told that this was the way of the Creator. And this is one reason why God loved him. And he says that he was going to share his plans with what he was going to do to the 5 cities in the plain of Sodom. But being the righteous man that Abraham was, he challenged the Creator in his decision. He asked the Creator if he would destroy the righteous with the wicked. He asked the Creator if he would wipe out, if he would stomp out the righteous with the wicked. Now, this is before Mount Sinai. This is before the written and the oral Torah that the Creator would give Moses. This was sometime after the flood, because Abraham was living at the time, I believe, if I remember right, when Noah was still alive, or he's just in the time period of his passing. We know that Abraham studied under Noah's son, Shem, and he brought Shem an offering. Shem, the son of Noah, was Melchizedek, the righteous king, who taught the 7 laws. And I want to back up a little bit. After the flood, the Creator gave Noah the 7th commandment. The 7th commandment topped off the laws for mankind. Just like during the creation week, God ended the creation on a 7th day. He also completed the laws and commandments of mankind with a seventh categorical commandment. And that commandment was this. After the flood, God told Noah, he said, all things that moves upon the earth shall be food for you as the herbage or the plant life. I have given you everything. But there is a restriction in eating. The restriction is that you shall not eat meat with its soul within it. Meaning that meat shall not be eaten that is taken from an animal while it is still alive. That is the restriction, the dietary restriction. The animal must be completely dead before meat is taken from it. So therefore, topping off the 7 commandments. Shem, the righteous son of Noah, who became Melchizedek, the righteous king after the flood, in which Abraham went to and also learned of the 7 commandments, went and taught his household and his children the 7 commandments. Now, like I said, God was coming to Abraham with his plans for the wicked cities of Sodom. There were 5 cities that's listed in the Hebrew Scriptures. Now, most people recognize that the city of Sodom, the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah and the other cities of the plain, the sister cities, yes, there was immorality. But we will look at the sins that God said He destroyed them for here in a minute, for they're specifically listed in the Hebrew Scriptures. But before we get to that, back to the conversation that Abraham had with the Creator. Again, Abraham challenged the Creator, saying, will you stomp out the righteous with the wicked? And he challenged him, he says, will you save the 5 cities if there are 50 righteous within them? And the Jewish sages teach us that this was a quorum. A quorum in Hebrew is 10. 10 men makes up a quorum. So Abraham's request was for at least 10 men of each of the 5 cities, 10 men of each of the 5 cities, being 50 men. If there were at least a quorum of men in each of the cities that were righteous. So we find this interesting. This is, like I said, this is before the giving of the Torah, the 613 total commandments of Israel at Mount Sinai. This is before God would speak to Moses in front of over almost 3 million people. But yet Abraham is challenging the Creator about 50 righteous men. Now we know in the story, he reduces it down to 45 and down to just 10. Just 2 men in each city. There had to be a standard that Abraham knew that men would live by to be considered righteous in front of the Creator. If the Creator was going to send His messengers into Sodom to look for righteous men, there had to be a standard to look for. It just couldn't be any standard. Observing the laws of theft and murder intellectually is not righteous. It's just you're a good person. There is a point where where it goes from being a good person to a righteous person. And the righteous person observes the commandments because the Creator had spoken them. Now the Creator had spoken them to Adam. And He had spoken to Noah in giving of the 7th. And so there was an oral tradition from the time of Adam to the time at Mount Sinai, that there was an oral tradition that God had spoken certain things for man to live by. And when they lived by them because the Creator said so, that deemed them righteous. Again, if the 7 Noahide laws are rabbinic, then what was it? What made these people, if there were people in Sodom who were righteous, that Abraham was defending, what was their standard? What did they do? Because righteousness is an action. It's the result of your actions. Wickedness and righteousness are the end results of your actions. So if they were a rabbinic command, if the 7 laws was a rabbinic command in our modern time, since in the common era, let's say since the Second Temple forward, and when the Talmud, when the oral law was finally written down, then again, if God was going to judge the world and destroy it, there had to be a standard to judge the world by. If God was going to judge Sodom and the cities of Sodom, there had to be a standard in which the judge would mete out his strict judgment against them. A judge does not judge arbitrarily. He does not just make up his mind and say, oh, you're wicked. Well, what are the standards? What deems wickedness and what deems righteousness? There has to be a code of law that separates righteousness and wickedness, in which a person, a city, or a nation, or the entire planet is judged by. So, just the mere fact of the conversation with Abraham and the Creator about 50 righteous, or any righteous, one righteous person in the city, shows us that there was a standard in which the Creator looked at a man and deemed whether he was righteous or he was wicked. And so, but there is a middle ground, which I'll not covering in this video, but there is a middle ground where there is a group of people that are in between. But as far as judging between righteousness and wickedness, we see again that there had to be a standard. Now, when we read in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 16, we find that we find listed the sins that God judged the cities of Sodom by. These sins were the sins of injustice, the sins against the poor and the needy and the widow. The cities of Sodom actually had created laws that prohibited people from giving charity, from helping the poor. And actually, if someone helped the poor or the needy, they were punished. Sodom and Gomorrah and the other cities lived in a plain that was very fruitful. And in Ezekiel 16, it says that they had a lot of bread, meaning they had a lot of produce, a lot of food, a lot of wealth that they could have shared. It was in a position to where no one would be poor. It was enough for everyone. But the cities deemed not only the poor, but if a stranger coming into the city was deemed illegal. And they mistreated them, putting them outside the city, sometimes to starve to death. These were injustices against humanity at its base level. And the Hebrew Scripture says these are the sins of Sodom and her sister cities that they were destroyed over. So again, we have this situation where when it comes to the point of destroying and wiping man off, whether it be the world or whether it be a plane of cities, is man-to-man interaction. How we treat one another. Yes, Sodom and Gomorrah had immoralities. And that was part of their sins. But the sins that we are told about is the sins against one another. Okay, now to the third example and final example I want to cover. And that is the situation with Jonah and the city of Nineveh. It said that the wickedness of Nineveh had risen up to the throne of heaven. And so God sent a prophet from his people. Now I'm going to back up a little bit. At Mount Sinai, God separated, the Creator separated one nation from the rest and created a priest nation. This nation operates on its very own covenant, its own laws. And the 7 commandments that we of the nations have is a part of their covenant. But there are aspects of their covenant that is not permitted for the rest of us, because they are the priest nation. They are to be the light of the nations. They are created to teach us what we are to do according to what the Hebrew Scripture says that they were given and what they are to do. It does not make them any better than the rest of us. They just have a different job. The Creator separated them out for a total different job to do than the rest of us. The rest of us, it looks like, oh, we only have 7 commandments. Well, they're categorical. They're precepts. There are many more sub-laws and sub-commandments that are under them. And then there are many aspects of the laws that aren't commanded. They're just expected, like charity, prayer, and faith, and personal character, honesty, the way we live our lives. There are a lot of things that is in our life that are in the moral laws that aren't commanded, but they're expected. Now, at Mount Sinai, when God spoke to Moses, he says he would speak to Moses in front of the people, which was over 3 million people, so that they would believe in Moses forever. Moses is the prophet. There is no prophet higher or greater than Moses. Moses is the one who received the commandment to write down all of the words that God had spoken. But God in Exodus chapter 19 says, I speak to you in front of all these people that they may believe in you forever. Those are direct words from the Creator. That Moses is to be believed in his writings and what he wrote on behalf of the Creator, that it is to be believed forever, never to be changed, never to be added to. The commandment to not add to or take away was given to Moses. Now, early on, in the story of Mount Sinai, when it says that that Moses wrote down the words of God, this was, our sages teach us, the book of Genesis. And that was the book of the law that he read to them. Now again, like I said, the Torah is its own language. It has to be learned from someone who knows how to speak it, read it, and live it. We cannot pick up, those of us of the nations cannot pick up a translation, or even if you can just read Hebrew, you learn to read Hebrew, biblical Hebrew, you really can't just read the Hebrew on your own without a teacher from that culture. It's its own language. It needs to be taught. And that is the place of Israel, the priestly nation. They are the ones who have studied it and lived it and have messed up plenty on their own for 3,300 years since the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. Now, one of the complaints against the 7 Noahide Commandments is that it's not listed like the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments was not given to the nations. When you read the plaque of the 10 Commandments out in society, these carvings that they want to put at the courthouse or the one that's hanging up at church, that is an altered version. Because there's an important part of the 10 Commandments that's left out, and it's the very first thing. The thing that is left out on these 10 Commandment plaques that are hanging up everywhere is these words: I am the Lord thy God who brought you out of the house of bondage. Boom! That tells you who the 10 Commandments are. God did not bring every nation and every person outside of the nation of Israel, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He did not bring them out of the house of bondage. This denotes who the 10 Commandments are for. When God spoke the 10 Commandments in their form at Mount Sinai, it was for Israel only. Now I want to fall back. In the book of Genesis, we find the 7 Commandments, but they're not listed in bullet point form. Technically, they're listed in story form. They're encoded in the words that God spoke to Adam and Noah and Abraham. They're encoded in there not to be hidden, but that it changed. It changed at Mount Sinai. The 7 laws were no longer just orally taught from family to family. This time, they were commanded upon Israel to teach the nations. They were commanded upon Moses. So now, when we observe the 7 commandments to be righteous among the nations, we accept the 7 commandments upon ourselves because God spoke them to Moses in with the other commandments to be taught to us at Mount Sinai. They are now written down in the Torah, but they are written by the command of God to Moses. And therefore we have to accept the authority of not only the Creator, but the authority that the Creator gave Moses in writing these down. And when he wrote them down, the Creator communicated them to him in like a story form, from which we have the Torah itself is in story form, from Genesis all the way up to Deuteronomy. And so he gave the 7 commandments, now will not be passed on orally, like I said, from family to family. But it would be coming to us by the way of the Torah, by the way of the priestly nation to us. And as an example, we have in Zechariah 8:3, there will come a point in a time where it says 10 men of the nations will go and grab Yehuda, a Jew. It doesn't specifically say any other tribe but Judah. The Hebrew says Yehuda. And say, please take us with you, for we know that God is with you. We know that God has taught them. We are to learn from Israel what God expects of us. Specifically, Judah. Judah is one of the tribes that are to teach us. Because it says we are to grab the garment of a Jew, Yehuda. Now, back to Nineveh. God sent one of his priests, a prophet, one of the priests in the operation of the gift of prophet, to Nineveh, a Gentile city. And he was to declare that their wickedness had ascended to the throne of heaven, and that they were going to be destroyed. A strict decree of judgment had come upon the city of Nineveh. The sages of Israel teach us that Nineveh was a city of around 120,000. That it would take, I believe it was 3 days to walk its diameter. And he was to go in the midst of the city and begin to proclaim their destruction was coming. Now again, if there were no guidelines for the Creator to go by, then why was Nineveh being judged? What made Nineveh wicked to the point that it was going to be destroyed? A Gentile city that the Creator had to send one of his priests from Israel to the Gentile city to warn it of its destruction. What was so bad? Again, did the Creator arbitrarily think, oh, I'm going to destroy this city today? I think they're wicked. The Creator doesn't think someone is wicked. Again, righteousness and wickedness is by our actions and what we violate and what He has stated we are the correct actions of a human being. And the correct actions of a human being are what we call today the 7 Noahide Commandments. The commandments of the Creator for the children of Noah, the non-Jewish people. The sages of Israel teach us through their oral traditions from the time of Jonah that the sins of Nineveh were the sins of the flood. That was how corrupt Nineveh had become. They had corrupted themselves to the point that their sins were as vile as the sins of the flood. The primary sins that the sages of Israel teach us that they were going to be destroyed for was robbery and injustice. Theft was rampant, and injustice against the poor and the widow and the orphan flourished throughout the city. They mistreated the widow and the orphan and the poor. And they robbed from one another. That they had schemes to take from one another. And it was a lifestyle of theft. Of every citizen within the city lived a lifestyle of theft and injustice. Now, what was interesting is that the king of the city, the leader of the city there, got a hold of this message and took it to heart. And from the top down, the city repented. And we learn at the end of the story that God saw their deeds and rescinded the strict judgment and decided not to destroy them because what He saw. What they done, according to the sages of Israel, they have recorded in their tradition, is that they stopped the lifestyle of theft, and they stopped injustice, and began to take care of the poor, the needy, and the orphan. And because of them changing their lives from theft to charity, pretty much, from theft to charity, and return, not only did they just stop stealing, they began to return stolen objects back to the rightful owners, be it just a coin, land, kidnapping someone, children, or whatever is theft. But an interesting note was made by the sages in their tradition, and they recorded that God rescinded the strict decree of destroying the city for what he saw and accepted the repentance. But yet not one pagan temple came down. None of their pagan worship was changed. Again, we have for the third time, if you want to say strike one, strike two, strike three, the third example we have in the Hebrew Scriptures, when God was going to destroy a city, was because of the treatment of man against man. The prohibition of murder, the prohibition of theft, and they did not have proper court systems set up so justice would flourish through the land because they had injustice. So we have three commandments out of the 7 deals with man-to-man interaction. And it was the violation of the laws against man that God chose to destroy the earth at the time of the flood, that he chose to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, and he was going to destroy Nineveh. But Nineveh changed for a period of time. It changed, and because it changed how they were treating one another, he did not destroy the city at that time. So again, I want to say that the 7 Noahide laws, the prohibition of idolatry, the prohibition of blasphemy, the prohibition of murder, the prohibition of theft, the prohibition of forbidden sexual relations, the prohibition of eating meat taken from a live animal, and the positive commandment of setting up laws and courts to ensure that these 6 commandments are kept. They have been with us. The 6 commandments was with us from Adam to Noah. After Noah, the 7th commandment on the eating of meat was given. From that time forward up to Mount Sinai, it was orally given. And this was the standard in which God judged man as an individual, man as a community, man as a city, man as a nation, and man as a whole on the planet. That is why it is important that we must learn these commandments and observe them, because the Creator spoke them at Mount Sinai. The great voice spoke them to Moses. And Moses wrote them down the way he was told to write them down, in the language of the Torah. And to be able to understand that you can intellectually observe these commandments. They're rational. But you're only a good person, and a good person is great. And it gives us a great society to live by. But if you're one who seeks the Creator and wants to be one that is righteous among the nations and even pious, we are told that we are to be careful in their observance, and that we are to be careful in their intricate details. That we must learn every detail about each one of the commandments which are categorical. They're precepts. Because underneath each one, like theft, there's so much. Theft is very, very deep subject to study because there's so much that pertains to theft. It goes way beyond just taking another person's property. And so to understand the very deep details of theft and murder and forbidden sexual relations and idolatry and blasphemy and the treatment of the creation through the seventh commandment that was given, they have to be studied in their intricate details and learned and then carefully kept. And one cannot do that on their own. You've got to go to a teacher that can teach you the language of Torah. Just like people buy Rosetta Stone to learn a language, they go and they get a teacher to teach them the language. And so my personal belief on the situation is that to properly understand the language of the 7 Noahide Commandments, we need a proper teacher from that language. That we can't learn them on our own by just picking up a book, a translation like this one that's English and Hebrew. I can learn some things on my own, but to properly understand the language, I need a teacher to understand the intricate details of the laws. But the primary thing I wanted to share in this video, and I know it's been long, but this has been on my mind for a while and one I wanted to share, is how important these laws really are, how important these 7 commandments are, that they have been with us since the time of Adam and Noah, in that they're not a creation of rabbis. They are actually recorded down from the prophet Moses. And the rabbis help us dissect what Moses wrote for not only the Jewish people, but for the non-Jewish people, the B'nai Noah, the children of Noah, or the Noahides as the term is today, or in modern times. It's really been bothering me, and that's the reason why I wanted to come bring this to you. That I've laid at night thinking about how important these laws are, and that there are people who, when they're rejecting these commandments of the Creator, and wanting to, for some reason or another, make excuses of why. I mean, why would you reject a prohibition of murder? Or because it's not, or a prohibition of theft, or a prohibition of idolatry, because it's not bullet point written down, or because the word Noahide isn't in the Hebrew. The word B'nai Noach is, and I've got a video on that. If you want to know where the word Noahide actually kind of came from, I've got a video on what a Noahide is. And I show you in the Torah the Hebrew word B'nai Noach, which basically is children of Noah. But it's just really, I wanted to share this from the bottom of my heart because, to be honest with you, at one time I rejected the 7 laws. Oh, they wasn't enough. They wasn't good enough. I want more. I want to go, do this and be that. But until I actually sat down and did my due diligence, opened up my Torah, sought out some teachers that knows a whole lot more about the Hebrew scriptures than I do, and let them teach me what it says. And just like the foundation verse of the 7 laws is this in Genesis 2 verse 16. And Hashem, God, the 4-letter word of God's name, and Elohim, Hashem Elohim, commanded the man. And in Hebrew, the word that's translated as commanded, the sages teaches us that the way it is used in that verse really means he warned man. It was a warning. And really all the prohibitions, that's what they are. There's 6 prohibitions, and they're warnings of things that we shouldn't get into if we want to live a good and harmonious life with one another and with God. So, I wanted to make this video to prove to you that God gives us three examples in the Hebrew Scriptures to prove that there is a standard in which He judges man by. And He judges the nations by the 7 laws. He judges Israel by all 613 that He gave them in their covenant. We have a plate full on our own, because they're just not 7 basic plain laws. They're categorical. There are many sub-laws under each one, and then within them are expectations that are not commanded, but they're expected, like charity, taking care of the poor, the widow, and the orphan. We are not commanded to do those things. We're expected to. So there's a lot for us to learn and a lot for us to do. And the more that we can teach other people these 7 commandments, the better. Because I just learned that one of the standards of righteousness that is demanded upon a person, and one that he was looking for in Sodom, was this: you can't be a closet observer of the 7. You have to be active within your community. You have to be active within the community you live. You have to be open that you are a God-fearer, that you fear God and keep His commandments. And these commandments are the 7 Noahide laws that I've brought before you today, and the 3 examples of how God used them to judge the world and 5 cities and 1 city. So, I hope you take to heart and do your due diligence and start researching the 7 commandments on your own and living by them. And as you learn, share. Share with others. This is not like trying to get anyone saved, but this is sharing the commandments of the Creator for the benefit of mankind, that we can live together in harmony and produce communities that live by the commandments of God. And one day we can leave our doors unlocked and our windows open again, just from observing these 7 commandments. We can have that community we all dream about, because these laws will produce that. So I hope you enjoyed this and watched it all the way through to the end. I know it's long. If you have any comments, please feel free to comment below. I appreciate anyone that comments and shares what they have learned, their experiences with the 7 commandments. If you have an experience with one or all, or how you came to the 7 commandments through the guidance of the Creator, feel free to share that in the comments. And I just want to wish you a good day, and I want to thank you for visiting Emunah again. Don't forget my blog at emunahtrek.com. I'm going to, Hashem willing, be writing a blog that's going to cover some more information from the situation of what Abraham and the Creator was talking about, the righteous of Sodom. Hashem willing, I'll be writing a blog soon on that. So visit my blog as well, because there will be things that I won't cover in the videos that I'll cover in writing. But thank you again for visiting Emunah Trek and emunahtrek.com. Good day.